Hello, everybody. I'm Lauren Barley, and I'm the Executive Director of SPIRE, which is the Stanford Professionals in Real Estate. And I wanted to welcome you to the SPIRE JP Morgan Chase webinar today on reimagining the built environment. And we're going to look at the intersection of real estate, innovation, and technology. Just as a quick background, SPIRE was formed in 2009, and we're an official alumni club of Stanford University, and with a mission to help innovation in the built environment. And we serve alums, students, and the university itself. And we are so fortunate that we started a partnership a little over a year ago with JP Morgan Chase. And again, they had the same mission, which was to see how we could promote and empower different stakeholders to improve innovation in the built environment. So it's a timely topic to talk about sustainability today, and especially with the announcement yesterday of the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability with a $1.1 billion commitment from John and Ann Doerr. So we're really excited that you are here with us today. And I wanted to introduce today's moderator, who is Nathaniel Gooden, and he is from JP Morgan Chase. Thanks so much. Enjoy.
Thanks, Lauren. And thank you to everyone for attending this event today. As Lauren mentioned, my name is Nathaniel Gooden, and I'll be your moderator. I'm a licensed professional civil engineer, having served previously as a captain in the United States Army and Army Corps of Engineers. Most recently, I've spent the last 2 years financing commercial real estate deals at JP Morgan Chase. I have now moved on to start an engineering construction firm here in New York. I am very excited to host such an interesting discussion on a subject that I believe has an outsized impact on our future. Having worked intimately here in the United States and both globally in areas of the world such as Africa and Asia, I've witnessed firsthand both the demand for good design and the unfortunate consequences of unsustainable development. I am completely aligned with the mission to build better and more sustainable places for people to live, and I am very excited for our conversation that we're going to have on that topic. So before jumping in, I want to highlight a few facts to prime you all on this topic. The current world population of 7.6 billion people is expected to reach 8.6 billion in 2030 and 9.8 billion in 2050. According to the UN Environmental Program, the equivalent floor space of Paris is added in new construction every 5 days, with the equivalent of Japan being added every year. According to McKinsey Consulting, buildings contribute around 40% of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, which means that unless there's a change, we can guarantee the contributions of millions of tons of CO2 entering our atmosphere to meet the construction demand of our growing population. For reference, high-performance buildings such as near-zero energy buildings typically make up less than 5% of construction in most markets today. This is not helped by the fact that there is a dearth of innovation in the construction industry itself. Large built projects across most asset classes typically take 20% longer to finish than scheduled and are up 80% over budget. This trend is supported by data that less than 1% of revenues are spent on research and development in the construction industry versus around 4% for other industries such as the automobile and aerospace sectors. So those are some facts just to outline the immense challenge that we have ahead of us. So armed with those facts in mind, I would like to begin our conversation. First, I want to highlight to everyone that all of our attendees have the option of submitting a question during this discussion. You can open the Q&A chat function on this webinar, which should be in your Zoom window, and type in a question during the event. I'm going to be diligently scanning that Q&A list, potentially bringing those questions into our discussion. And even if you do not have a question yourself, you can upvote a question if you feel that it is important to you. At the end of our conversation, we will have a dedicated time to go through questions. So now jumping into the main event. Among us today, we have three distinguished panelists, including Shayna Doerr, who is the CEO of Canopy Buildings, Arlen Collins, who is the CEO and co-founder of Sustainable Living Innovations, and Dr. Sarah Buckner, who is an MBA candidate at Stanford, focused on construction technology. I would offer more background on these individuals, but would love for them to do that themselves. So I will first hand it off over to Arlen.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Arlen Collins, CEO and co-founder of Sustainable Living Innovations, SLI. I've been a practicing architect for the last 42 years. And rather than me try to tell you what we do, we've got a little video that will show you. And so if Alex can roll the video, then we can go from there.
Our industry has said for the last 75 years, there should be a way to manufacture a building, but no one's been able to pull it off. How do you make parts in a manufactured environment that can be assembled in the field as a building? That was the direction we chose, and it's turned out to be the right choice. The acoustics, the fire, the mechanical systems, the electrical systems, every system that's required in an apartment is manufactured on that panel in our factory as a fully integrated part. That's never been done.
It's a straightforward kit of parts that go together in the field. It's simple, it's repeatable. SLI's technology allows us to take that and transfer it to other markets.
An apartment wall that's built in the field can take months. In the SLI factory, we've manufactured all the components, and that same wall can be assembled in an hour.
Conventional buildings take months, if not years, to get to costing and schedule. Because we have a catalog of parts, I'm able to drag and drop those same units and pieces and design an SLI building in a matter of hours. There's no comparison.
We are the only complete building system ever patented in the United States of America.
SLI has a patent portfolio consisting of 165 patents from all around the world.
At full capacity, our Tacoma factory will employ 60 people. That will allow us to build a 120 unit apartment every month.
Much like a car going down an assembly line, our panel system goes down an assembly line. We're cleaner, safer, and faster.
Their supply chain feeds their factory, feeds their panels, feeds their buildings, feeds their crews who go out and build it on site and hand the keys to the owner. That's a very different model and a very different paradigm than the traditional construction paradigm.
We've been waiting to celebrate this for a long time. This building is 100% electric, powered by solar power. You could not build this building in a traditional way.
303 Battery, an SLI project that we're invested in, is the world's first net zero energy multifamily tower. Their solutions are reality and more sustainable. Buildings are coming out of the ground as we speak.
This is going to change construction, and that doesn't happen very often.
And that's just the beginning. This building has 5,000 internet data points in it. That data will allow us to improve our products, improve our systems, and do even better.
This project, 303 Battery, is leading the way to a net zero future for multifamily housing.
The built environment is one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. When we looked at SLI's materials and process, we knew right away that their environmental performance was transformational.
SLI's technology allows us to build some of the highest performing, lowest GHG or greenhouse gas buildings in the world.
We're talking about being able to build our infrastructure in an entirely different way, and in an industry that hasn't changed a lot and is ripe for change and ripe for disruption. And timing is tremendous for SLI.
The people that work here, people that buy our buildings, the people that live in our buildings, they all should be better off because of what we do. That's our hope. Our technology makes a new way of living possible. Our buildings are beautiful, filled with natural light, providing access to the outdoors. Tenants love the SLI living experience. We're not just an idea or a notion. We're a growing technology company that is changing the way buildings are designed, developed, and delivered.
Great. Thank you, Arlen, for showing that. That's really amazing. And now it would be great to go over to our other panelists. Shayna, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Shayna Dorr, not related to the $1.1 billion door, a different door. But nonetheless, happy to be here and excited to be talking to folks who are interested about thinking about new ways to build sustainably. I think I'm always in good company when we have these conversations, and I very much believe that we need a lot of us working at it to solve the problems that we have out there, as Nate talked about earlier in the call. I also have a video, so I followed along Arlen's path there, and I will share that in a minute. For myself, I have about a 20-year career in entrepreneurship across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. That has been to really try to solve hard problems. Most of that has been in the urban environment and a lot surrounded around economic development. So I'm not an architect or an engineer, so I can't answer those technical questions for you, but I can talk a little bit about how we can tackle some of these hard problems by solving within and with new approaches. I started my career at a social enterprise when that was a new thing and new buzzword that was out there. Then I started the economic development practice at McKinsey, where I got to know folks in the city of Chicago and spent several years leading economic development for Mayor Rahm Emanuel in Chicago. In that capacity, I started several incubators raising several $100 million, and they have gone on to many, many, many more companies raising a lot of money for economic growth in the tech sector in Chicago. But the last 7 years have been the most exciting, where I've been an executive at Sidewalk Labs, which was one of Alphabet's spin-out bets. I've started several businesses here at Sidewalk Labs. The most public and the most successful was a company called City Block Health. It's an urban healthcare company serving low-income Medicare, Medicaid patients that are highly complex. They've expanded across multiple states. It's really exciting to see them expanding. And then there's been a few failures that I've worked on, of course, as well, like all startups. But right now, I'm hoping that my next endeavor that I've been leading for the last few years with a really incredible team coming out of Sidewalk Labs called Canopy Buildings will be successful as City Block. And the common theme here is looking at new ways to solve hard problems. At the core, that is the goal of what I try to do in all the endeavors that I've had. But I think a common theme across all of this is that these problems require step change improvement, but I recognize and realize that that doesn't mean that it has to happen overnight. It also doesn't mean that we have to totally blow up the current way of doing things. It does, however, mean that we need to have ambition for radical change eventually, and find the right ways to push and prod with new approaches, but sometimes while working within the current systems that we have. And I think that balance is really, really important for bringing new innovation, in particular to areas like the built environment that have a lot of stakeholders that have to come together to build projects and to make things happen.
Thank you, Shana, for sharing that. It's very, very interesting. And now finally, we would like to have Sarah introduce herself.
Thank you. I did not bring a video, so I'm going to be the video today. I started my career as a tradesperson, actually as a carpenter when I was 12 years old. So I have been in the construction industry for the last 18 years. I worked my way up. I was a foreman, a superintendent, a site manager, project manager. So I've built these skyscrapers that two of you are designing or like putting together. And at the top of my career, one of my workers died on a project and I was devastated. So I decided we need to change things. So I came up with a health and safety app. So I was being an entrepreneur for several years, really switching from real construction to construction tech, trying to help the industry with bringing in innovation and software into the industry. While doing all of this, I studied to be an architect and an engineer. So I've done it both. I have master's degrees in both and then finished my PhD in Europe. My background is also European, so I'm looking forward to having a discussion about sustainability in Europe versus in America, in the sense of prefab, but also in the sense of like just government regulations and how the society reacts to sustainability approaches. And ultimately I ended up at Stanford, where I'm finishing up my MBA right now, and I started a startup like the people do at Stanford Business School. And my startup is helping or solving the skilled labor shortage right now. So we are trying to tackle sustainability from a labor perspective. And I give it back to you now.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you all for introducing yourself. So let's dive into it. So as we think about sustainability, I would like to first focus on the impact buildings have on our climate. So even though there have been strides in operational energy improvements like lighting, heating, cooling, hot water, much of the greenhouse gases are associated with the construction and embodied carbon associated with extracting, transporting, manufacturing, and installing the building materials on site. So all of you have expertise, and your expertise is touching on this very specific issue. So my first question is to you, Sarah, and then I'll open it up to Shayna and Arlen. Where do you think the biggest strides can be made in cutting down emissions during the construction process, whether that's actual techniques, regulations, or materials?
I think regulations are always just a framework to make people drive decisions in a different direction. So I think we do need regulations in order to make decisions that might cost a little bit more in the beginning. And then in the end, I think like where we can really change something is like, I mean, it's almost all over the place, but we need to start at the design, which was like both of these videos were talking about, that we need to change the design process of buildings to bring in more sustainable materials. But then there's a lot of stuff we can actually do while being on site, reducing waste, as we've seen in these videos, reducing even just like labor hours that go into these buildings, and like reducing inefficiencies overall. Inefficiencies are also a part that makes like construction really unsustainable.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And as a civil engineer, CAD and BIM are really great tools that I use and I'm familiar with, whether using Revit or SketchUp. And so, right, that design process is very key. And I'm sure our attendees in our audience can speak to that. Now, Shayna and Arlen, what you guys are talking about is a manufacturing process. You're bringing manufacturing into the space. So I think maybe on the design side, that'd be great if I can go into SketchUp and I can pull from the extension warehouse that some of you may be familiar with. I can say, oh, let me pull this SLI panel, let me pull this canopy buildings panel and just piece together my building that I want to build. I think that would be awesome. So first I want to throw it to Arlen. How do you think that the design process is going to be improved with a product like SLIs? Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you, Nate. At SLI, we've been on a 13-year track to turn a building into a product. So our view of the world is you can't really move the needle on any of these things unless you build thousands of exactly the same thing. That doesn't mean the building is the same, but it means, in our case, the apartments, if we're currently doing apartments are the same. So we have 8 units that we make, and those units are identical in the way that the infrastructure works, the way the pipes, the wires work, the way all the math works. And what that allows us to do is have a supply chain that scales with us, and they reduce the waste. So for instance, since our stuff has to sit in the rain while we build it, we use a lot of yellow board that Den's Glass makes it. We use a USG product that they produce called exterior sheathing. They cut that to size for us. So we don't ship the waste. They recycle the waste. And you can't do that if you don't buy 6 semis of exactly the same thing. So in our world, it's got to become a product, much like a plane or a car, because as long as it's one-off or it's a project and not a program, you're going to struggle to actually move the needle on most of these milestones.
Yeah, a great point. And so now going into canopy buildings, also talking about manufacturing, Shayna, your team and Side Oak Labs came out of Google, right? That they also birthed SketchUp, which was acquired by Trimble. And so there's a philosophy in there of creating this, that I've noticed, of this plug and play, this ability to have a type of core system and then bring in different types of add-ons or extensions. That's what I've noticed from the software philosophy. So with that being said, with canopy buildings, and I've seen that your kit of parts, which I found very interesting. What is the philosophy that you guys have at canopy building, especially starting from the premise that you're using timber, which is an age-old building material?
Right. So, the way that we started was actually from the sustainability angle, period, full stop. So as many probably know, we were working on a project in Toronto, and we had a goal to have a negative carbon neighborhood. And so we approached that incredibly widely, looking at how we designed the streets, how we designed all the energy systems and the infrastructure, but also the buildings. And so pretty quickly we said, look, we have to get green concrete and steel at some point as a society, but we're quite a ways off from that right now. So let's look at timber. And the thing that's interesting about timber is that, yes, it's a very, very old product, it's trees, but mass timber as a material, while it's been used for several decades in Europe and been going up in Europe for quite a while, it's relatively new here in North America. There are a few projects and there's more and more every year. Every single time we see one go up, we get more excited because it becomes a more adopted material, but it's still a pretty new material here. So it means that there's not a lot of engineers, designers, contractors, and suppliers here in North America. The ecosystem isn't quite there yet. Nonetheless, having the goal to build a negative carbon neighborhood, we designed an incredibly beautiful neighborhood, and then we penciled it all out. And of course, it did not pencil, and it was way too expensive, and there was no way that it was going to work. And so, we had honestly the luxury and the mandate to be able to say, okay, let's think about a new way to construct these buildings. And so, went on a bit of a journey around the world and came to a place that is pretty similar to the core principles that Arlen talked about, which is you have to find a way to find repeatability in your parts, but still have flexibility in design. Find that repeatability though, so that you can justify the investment in the automation of the production of those parts. Like Arlen said, have the condensing of the supply chain so that you can bring down the cost as well. And so we designed a model based on what we found around the world in terms of the best in class of offsite contractors, timber manufacturers, and timber contractors, where there's a lot, I'm sure that Sarah can talk about it, over in Europe, in particular in the Switzerland area, and designed our kit of parts and our model for that. I think that what is really interesting is that we need to get to a place where there are thousands of different options of offsite kit of parts that you can choose from, because the whole industry just needs to shift to that model, right? It can't be that you're only calling on Arlen and Shayna to come up with these models. Yeah. There has to be a whole supply chain of them. And the whole reason why we said we have to build the factory and build this ourselves is because we couldn't find anywhere to source them ourselves. Otherwise, we would have just sourced them for our Toronto project. So I think that, and I hope that we are on the beginning of a new revolution and how we think about a much deeper supply chain of panelized parts that still give you that flexibility, that allow you to ship it and use sustainable materials.
Great point. Thank you, Shana, for sharing. And that's very interesting. Now, in thinking about the constructability and the methods, Sarah, I want to throw this question to you. What do you think about the timeline of getting these things implemented? I mean, the construction industry has historically lagged behind other sectors in R&D and innovation. So, these are great ideas and these are great concepts that are actually being built. But, obviously I've, through the labor pools and trades and so on, there is a little bit of a slowness to adopting, new ideas. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think just to make it more relatable to like the prefab we're talking here, but the modular buildings, I think we saw that in Europe, right? Like these ideas are incredible. They're good for like the world and for sustainability reasons. And the thing is, like, they're not being adopted if they don't reduce costs, right? Like this is like, we're still in a very capitalist like world, at least in the countries we're talking about right now. So I think what we tried to push in Europe like 10 years ago was like, oh, let's do like life cycle costing, right? Like, let's think about like a building from like the time we start designing it to actually the time when we like recycle it and like break it down again. And let's like see the overall cost and, like, let's put more insulation on it so we can reduce heating costs. And the concept was great in theory, it just didn't work in practice because the people who built the buildings are not necessarily the ones that operate it or like that even like keep it, right? Like, so the real estate developers who build it are going to sell it while it's probably constructed or like a year or two after. So most of the market is not really interested in thinking about the whole life cycle costing of a building. So I think like that's why it didn't really take off in that regard, even so it might have been cheaper over the time. So the way it was done in Europe was really like being pushed by governments, right? Like, okay, if we push, like, I think you've all heard about EU taxonomy and all these new regulations that came out over the last few years. So now companies are forced to like show their sustainability like initiatives and like to bring their building costs down and their CO2, like they're forced to reduce CO2. And so I think this is something how it works over there. And I think then it's not really a question of adoption, because then we have to adopt it. So that's more how I see it in general. Obviously, like the construction and real estate sector is not the most innovative like sector in the world. So the only thing that works in these industries is when it actually either makes it cheaper or makes their life better. Nothing else is going to be adopted fast.
Thank you, Sarah. And I do have a question from the audience for you, Sarah, building off of that. Can you speak a little bit to the skill labor shortage? Do you think there's any improvements there with this new innovation?
So I think the question I read, it was like a little bit more around like how we tackle it as a company. And like, again, we are stealth, so I'm not gonna like, like provide any like secrets here. But the overall idea is really like, we have the biggest skilled labor shortage in the United States right now in history. So it's like a nice idea to have an infrastructure bill coming up and all of that, but we don't actually have the labor force to build these buildings and these infrastructure projects. We don't really have an immigration system that could help with that either. So the overall idea is really like, if we can't solve the labor shortage, we have to get more out of the people we do have currently in our system. So it's all about increasing productivity on site. And this is why my argument was before, when we increase productivity, we're actually acting more sustainable, because we will reduce waste. If it's human waste or like, material waste, it's all the same kind of approach. So what we are doing is really like, we're focusing on increasing productivity and safety on site. And by doing that, like reducing the skilled labor shortage.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So sustainability has a number of dimensions, and it's not just about more sustainable construction methods and processes, but it's also about the ongoing environmental impact of the building over its life cycle. With that, Shana, can you speak to how is the Canopy Buildings product addressing the life cycle costs?
Yeah, sure. So we designed the full buildings and had the opportunity to do several LCAs for the designs of the buildings to help us to make trade-offs along the way to find the right materials and operating systems that allowed us to go as low as possible on our LCAs, both for embodied carbon as well as for operational carbon. I will say that we are more focused on the design and the construction of the building than we are the ongoing operations, but nonetheless have designed in some systems that allow for sustainability on the back end. One thing I will say, and it kind of echoes off of what Sarah was saying, in that we just have to bring down the cost of doing a lot of these things, because I don't think that there is a lack of desire to want to choose sustainable solutions, whether that's your energy systems, your building materials, your processes, et cetera. But it has to be at something that is cost competitive and doesn't compromise the quality of the product or the building. So to that end, one of the things that we did, we designed our facade system for the Canopy buildings to be passive house compliant. So gets it all the way to a level of performance that can dramatically bring down the cost as well as the emissions of the systems, because it's just a building, an airtight building envelope. So up front, being able to build in a way that allows you to lower the energy costs over time. Again, though, I will say, it's not like you talk to a lot of owners or developers who say, yeah, I don't want passive house. It's more that, yeah, that's great, but how do I actually make that work from a cost perspective? And so that's where the whole process of bringing it offsite, standardizing the process, everything that we talked about in the earlier question is really important, because it allows you to bring down the cost, as well as the fact that you're precision manufacturing it, using machining, which also improves the efficiency of the building as well.
Great point. And with that, Arlen, with SLI's technology, you have a lot of IoT in your buildings, which allows users and the building management to see the actual usage of resources throughout your building. Can you speak to how SLI is really improving that process and how it's contributing to lowering lifecycle costs?
Sure. Well, I'll piggyback on what Sarah and Shana said. It's a long journey, and it's fraught with inertia that doesn't want to change, for sure. We did tackle in our product, since we went at it from a product perspective, we went at the systems in the building that would significantly reduce the greenhouse gases. So and the energy bill over time. So we're somewhere between 80 and 90% less greenhouse gas and embedded carbon than a traditional building. And we did it kind of the old-fashioned way. Sarah, you're from Europe, so hot water is the lowest cost way to heat a building ever invented. And so we put radiant heat in our floor products. And in Seattle, as an example, about 40% of the energy in an apartment building in Seattle is heat. About 40% is domestic hot water, and the other 20% is associated with, your plug loads, lights, etc. So what we did is we jumped to hot water for heat. That way we could create a central system for domestic hot water and heat. And then we put in recycling systems in the building. So when we make hot water for domestic use, we collect it in a gray water system, and then that system takes the heat out of the gray water and puts it back in the hot water tank. So the way we're getting at the long-term operational cost of the building is to actually build central systems and to do it all with the same medium, so we can make those systems super efficient and do it at scale. So that's how we're solving the problem, and it seems to be working. So we've got really good stats, and it's a really big piece of the interest in our technology, not only in this country but around the world. So we think we're on the right track to get the energy bill down and to get the greenhouse gases out. But we're pretty convinced it's going to take central systems and in-building recycling to do it.
Yeah, of course, and that's a great point of now we're talking about changing the industry, changing the mindset, right? Introducing these innovative ideas, but with all innovation and with some of these systems that are out there, they're expensive, and we really need those costs to come down. And we've seen that with other renewable energy sources as they start to come online, but the cost of building is sky high, as many people know, here in America and around the world. And I can say from firsthand experience, when I'm in my underwriting template or financial analysis and I'm breaking down the cash flows of a building for an investor, and they're like, hey, we want to put in, someone says we can put in this system. All we're looking at is really cash on cash ROI, right? Can we pay back the loan, et cetera? And that those numbers matter, especially when you're talking about large funds and large investors who are really just looking at that return. So when we talk about that, what do we think the relationship is between sustainability and affordability? And I'm going to first pass this question to Shana.
Yeah, so our whole reason to be was to bring down the cost of building buildings, because we designed these incredibly beautiful timber buildings and we couldn't afford to build them. And we had an affordability, capital A, affordability mandate that we wanted to achieve as well, in addition to our net zero or negative carbon goals. And so that is what drove us to off-site construction, repeatability, and all the things that we talked about at the beginning that both Arlen and Sarah talked about, that we need to drive down the cost of labor going into the buildings, because also we can't even find the people to build those buildings. We need to dramatically bring down the cost of how much labor is going into it. And then we also need to bring down the cost of the materials itself. And that's where standardizing those parts, buying in bulk, but also buying to the materials that are just to the level of what you need and cut to what you need, so that you don't have as much waste. So it is all about being more efficient, both with labor and materials, and production allows you to do that. I mean, sometimes I think, honestly, we design and build buildings like before the Model T in the automotive industry over 100 years ago. And so what we are almost skipping to now with models like the ones we're talking about is we're skipping over the totally standardized and moving to the slightly customized version, but still standardized parts. The other thing that we haven't talked about, and I'd be curious to get Arlen's perspective on this as well, is also taking waste out of the shipping and the trucking to get to sites. And that's where having a panelized approach that allows you to have efficient shipping of full parts to the site, you're dramatically also bringing down the number of trucks that have to get there, which brings down both cost as well as carbon emissions, as well as complexity on hard urban sites where you need to build more affordable housing.
Yep, and Arlen, and from your perspective, SLI is partnering with the city of Seattle, as I know, and with other stakeholders, right? And to you put up your buildings in Seattle, right? And it's helping solve some of the issues or make progress against affordability issues. Can you speak a little bit about that construction cost and how you really SLI's mission is tackling affordability?
Yeah, so we're, I really Shana's comments, I really resonate with all of her comments. I think what we've learned is there's trade-offs, right? So where we can save a bunch of money getting something made, then we can buy up to make something else, right? And so that's how we've been able to afford central systems in the building that probably cost 4x of a traditional building. It's because our walls can be made for a fraction of the cost of the wall in the field, right? So that's how it trades out. So 3.3 battery has 27 deed restricted affordable units in it, even though it's a high-rise building in downtown Seattle at zero. But we got the opportunity last year to team up with the city of Seattle and DESC, a local not-for-profit. And we're under construction for the DESC PSH project, Permanent Supportive Housing Project by Green Lake. And so that will house 124 people who are currently homeless. So one of the things we're trying to do with our technology is give back to the world and help the most vulnerable people in our community who really struggle. And the permanent supportive housing model of services for mental health, addiction, et cetera, on the first floor, and then apartments that are clean and healthy and provide actually internet connectivity and an opportunity to move themselves out of this situation that they're in. That's what we get to do and lower the operating costs for the not-for-profit at the same time. So we're pretty excited about that project. It'll finish up in the spring of next year. And we're excited to see the looks on the faces of the people who get to live there because it's a very different living experience. There's an entire glass wall that every inch of the apartment is filled with natural light. It's got great acoustics and it operates for 30% less than the building next door. So we'll see how all that goes. It's not built yet, but we're pretty excited about seeing if we can make a difference for the homeless population here in Seattle.
Well, that's amazing. And kudos to SLI for doing that. That's just helping us move things forward because there's a lot of talk and not a lot of action. And that is a great thing that is happening out there. Now, one thing in the built environment is energy standards. So I believe the statistic is that around 2/3 of countries out in the world don't have a baseline energy code. And here in the United States, we have energy codes. They're usually state dependent, but they're formed off of one basis code. I can't name the agency, but when you're looking at a residential design, when I'm looking up the codes, I usually see an energy construction code, and that defines what insulation you would use, what is the fenestration, U values and R values, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm bringing this up because I'm interested from Sarah's perspective. When we're talking about construction, there are standards out there in the world. And because you've had experience abroad and over in Europe, I want to know what your view is on the standards that we're setting. Do you think that the standards are lagging? Do you think that we can push a little bit forward? And finally, how do we get those standards to proliferate to countries, especially developing countries, who need these standards? Because honestly, they're producing a lot of carbon and no intent, it's just that they need to grow.
Yeah, it's a good question. I see it from both sides, right? From like want to do better for the world perspective, like let's do as many standards as possible. From like a realistic, having worked in construction perspective, I'm like, all these standards make our life so much harder, right? It makes it harder to do something new. It makes it harder to build fastest, whatever. So it's definitely like a two sides to the medal. So I think standards are good as long as they're doable and achievable without like driving the costs just up insanely. And so I think it's also a problem then, like for us in the Western countries trying to push this over to developing countries that have like way bigger financial needs right now than just like, trying to implement new standards. So that's my view. But again, I have not worked in developing countries, so maybe the other two can speak to that.
It is a hard nut to crack. I can tell you from my experience, particularly in Africa, for example, growing population. I was in West Africa for a bit with the State Department, and they are trying to build all this infrastructure. And there's a lot of foreign actors, I won't name any, that are there building infrastructure to questionable quality. And so we have to think about like, hey, we're in America, we're the innovators, right? We have this technology and we're trying to get it done here. And I know this sounds like a huge ask, but it's also that, hey, we can also help the world set a good standard so that we can move things ahead. And I can tell you the world will definitely benefit because guess what? We're adding 2 billion people by 2050. I don't think that they want to live in concrete boxes, even though as a civil engineer, I love good concrete, but hey, they want some good design and something that's sustainable. So Sarah, I appreciate your opinion there. And trust me, it's a hard nut to crack. We won't crack it in this conversation. With that, I do have some questions that are coming in the chat. I'm going to go to this first question here. I think it's more directed at Shanna and Arlen. This is from Lou. I hope I'm saying her name right. Vertical integration, doing more project phases than traditional construction. Let me just read this. So I think what Lou is asking is that the vertical integration piece is a significant shift from the current system in both in partnerships and supply chain. He's saying that in Europe, it has shown to lead to slow growth. How do you think it's going to play out for you, Arlen and Shana? So I think what he's saying is like, you guys are now redefining a supply chain here, right? And we have these big, long, traditional supply chains. What do you think is going to happen, especially as you guys try to build your platforms off of that? And Shana, you can answer first. I go to Arlen. I hope I asked it right. I apologize.
Yeah. So, this I think goes square in the category of what I said before, that we do need to shift and change the way that we operate in the building industry, but also potentially radically changing it overnight is not the best way to gain adoption, especially given the size of the industry and the fragmentation of the industry. So what we've tried to do is go really deep on the area of the value chain where we believe we can add the most value, which is the production of our kit of parts. That said, we want to make it as easy as possible to use our kit of parts. So are using tools for designing using our kit of parts, as well as tools to help for the assembly on site. But what that means is that we are attempting to go at this without radically vertically integrating across the whole value chain, because we want to make it as flexible as possible for our customers, whether they're owners or developers, to do kind of business as usual, use their own architecture and engineering firm, use their own general contractor on the back end, and just fit us into the process. Over time, I think that could change, but also I think that the second thing I'll say is, in addition to try to have radical change within the system and then move the system beyond it, I also think there's more than one way to skin the cat. And I think that what we're going to see is that there are going to be lots of different models that are going to win. And that just like there are lots of different ways and structures and models of how buildings are built, financed, developed, owned, operated right now, that's how it's going to be as we shift to a more industrialized construction model as well. So I think that there's many opportunities to think about lots of different ways to do it.
Thank you. And Arlen, I know that SLI is really focused on that supply chain and that integration. How are you making that secure, especially in light of the disruption that COVID has brought and the tension that we've gotten on our supply chain?
Well, Shana said something early on that resonated with our journey. There's no one to help you. There's just nobody out there that really will do much of anything that's not normal. So we are radically vertically integrated. So we're the developer, we're the contractor, we're the architect, we're the designer, we're the OEM manufacturer. We run the supply chain. We put the stuff together in the field. We put the stuff together in the factory. And so we do the whole thing. And the reason we do the whole thing is because there's no one to help and there's no one who's willing to do anything about it. At least that's what we found. So We've just gotten vertically integrated. Now, I would argue that's a really good way to change something because you control it all. But it's not a really good way to scale something because the amount of money that it takes to scale real estate is billions and billions and billions of dollars. So we're currently trying to make the shift with capital partners to get out of the development business and out of the capital business. But still, we've got to be able to write our product at a cost that works for our customer, which is typically the long-term holder. And for us to do that, we need to control all the puzzle pieces in order to deliver it on time and on budget. And that's the tricky part, right? So we've still got to stay in a lot of those seats over time in order to get it to cost what it's supposed to cost. Because the minute, at least our experience was, the minute you bring a traditional player into our movie, the cost goes up radically. Because they don't know what to do and you're not going to take any risk in learning how to do it. So that's the way it's rolled out for us. We'll see how it plays out over the next 3 or 4 years, but that's kind of where we're at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you. And I have another question from the audience. This one comes from Swen. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right as well. Curious whether SLI or Canopy are looking into applications for their panels / tech in retrofits. Are you guys just focused on new builds? Any big thoughts about renovating existing building stock? I think that's a great question, and I'll kick it back to you, Carl, to Arlen. Sorry.
Yeah, so we do have a product that's patented. So we have a building nervous system. I think the video mentioned we have 5,000 internet points. 303 battery was given an award by Realcomm, the Digi Award. It's the most technologically advanced building that they know of in the United States as a multifamily building. And so that product is a product that we're going to turn loose on the rest of the world because it doesn't require our building to make it work. So we're trying to get that financed and into the marketplace. So the energy performance and the way we drive the mechanical plant and the way we talk to the building and the way the building talks to us, all that is pretty sophisticated in the way that we've done it. Again, it's vertically integrated, but we think that's a product that will help others who do more traditional buildings actually get the data to be able to improve their performance.
Thank you. And Shana, have any thoughts?
Yeah, so we've kind of done some sprints on what we could do with retrofits, but I will say right now we are mostly focused on new builds and getting a few of those out the door first. But I do think it's a huge opportunity. I think it's really important. And Sarah, for your next Stanford startup that you go for some of your classmates, I think really going for that in particular as our buildings and we have return to work and that starts to shift and change. We really need to figure out how to use our existing building stock better than we are right at this moment in time.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So one thing I want to bring up, and this is geared towards Sarah. So there's a lot of new technologies out there and a lot relative to the construction industry as far as mapping and design work. So like, for example, digital twins or using a 3D point cloud scanner, which I've used before. And, right now their costs are all over the place. But, we as engineers and architects, the folks who are behind the design, right? They're doing things on the computer, they're doing things in CAD or BIM and so on and so forth. But sometimes, like after being on a job site with a lot of the people turning wrenches and doing it myself, there can be a disconnect between what actually happens from the design and what you get as a blueprints to what actually gets done. So I'm interested in your thoughts in how are we going to, what is like the technology or the technique that we need to start building to connect these ideas and this kind of digital transformation into the hands of the people in the field?
So I go back to a point that I made before. Everything's going to work in the field if it helps them or makes them more money. So like if it's like creating more work for, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself, but if it creates more work for the people in the field, they're not going to do it because their job is already like underpaid and way too stressful. So I was responsible for, at least at the time, back in the time, for the biggest BIM project in Europe. It was like a $300 million skyscraper. And I think we spent almost 2% of the building costs on the digital twin. So like it's completely unsustainable, right? It was like obviously big R&D project and so on. The way we did like the project was like perfectly done in BIM. Everybody worked in there, and then we were on site and things change and things happen, and people tried to make it happen and make it work. And then we sent like a lot of interns and students on site to like redo the BIM model once it was built, right? This as-built model, and then just to put it all back in. And now it's like up and running this building, and we're using it in facility management as much as possible. Is this worth it? For sure not, right? This was an innovation project and so on. We need to get to a point where this might be worth it. As the more we do modular construction and prefab, the less there will be changes on site, right? The more we can actually shift to a world where the BIM model reflects what we build out on site. But again, like in this, we will have traditional construction, especially in like the renovation projects we talked about, where there will just be like no modular construction for the next few years. If the tools are simple and if it has some value add for the people on site, then we'll have a digital twin. As long as we don't get there, we won't.
Yeah, and I think as new design comes forward and we have this idea of digital twin proliferating, hopefully more of that digital twin environment and library comes into play. I think some people on this call may be players of SimCity or City Skylines. You may know what it is, but it's basically a city simulation software, and there's a very dedicated group of people who are on that. And it would be cool to have cities totally mapped in a digital environment. I know for clients that I've worked with, when you design their home in SketchUp, it's kind of cool to walk them through their home and say, hey, this is your home in 3D, and you can play around with it. So that I think is going to take some time, Sarah, as you're saying, and it has to make sense.
Yeah, just even on top of this, sorry to interrupt you, like that is the easier part, right? I can like Open Door, whatever these companies are called, like you can put a camera on top, I can do the 3D mapping and the point clouds and all of that, but I can never look behind the wall. Right? It's like, as long as I don't do this constantly 24/7 in the building process, we will not like have like a real digital twin out there. And so I think there is a certain amount of companies that are trying to do that, but we're just not there where the technology and the AI is good enough to really translate this point cloud into a BIM model. And then we'll have a digital twin, but give it like whatever, 5 to 10 years, and then we have that too.
Yeah. So I have another question from the chat. I believe this comes from Kay. What is the outlook on used components kits when select pieces are removed for renovation, right? Like when you're installing them, what is are there regulatory limits on reusing building components from a previous site? So I think the question there is, something breaks in this new panelized construction paradigm. Like, how are we going to? How are your team building to address that? And this is specifically for Arlen and for Shayna. And Arlen, you can go first. Sorry.
I always let ladies go first. Maybe that's not the right thing to say. It's not politically correct, but anyway, I'll take this one, Shayna. First, you can follow up. So we're manufacturing our parts and pieces by the thousands. So it would be like trying to find a car part. Cars are made in 2, 3, 4, 500,000 units of a specific type, typically maybe 1 million on an annualized basis. And so those parts are everywhere because the scale of the manufacturing of those parts, it has to be available, right? We're not that scaled yet, but we're providing our owners with attic stock for things that can be damaged. Most of the things that we're using, with 2 exceptions, you can kind of buy at Home Depot in terms of the base materials that we use, steel studs and mineral wool and just basic stuff. So from our perspective, we've worked hard to put the building together with stuff you can buy, that's readily available, because of that fact that whoever's going to own it's going to have to manage it, right? And stuff happens over time. The building can be damaged from earthquake or fire and need to be repaired. And it needs to be simple and available to do that. So we only have 2 systems in our building that have been manufactured specifically for us. And everything else is not quite Home Depot, but pretty close. So that's been a focus of ours because it's just how the built environment works, right? Over to you, Shane.
Well, I let you answer first because you're the trained architect and I'm not. So in all honesty, I will say that the engineers and architects on my team would be much better at answering this question than I am. But what I will say is that we did design for disassembly as well. And that's where, part of, we talked before about standards, there is also just measuring and how we measure things. And so one of the benefits of thinking about things from the full life cycle analysis as we are doing our design is that we intentionally design for disassembly, at the end of life of a building, which hopefully is very long, but yes, of course, things break and change and elements come at it. So you have to, you lose it. And so those parts are all designed so that you can actually reuse them and or dispose of them in the proper way.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you both. And I just mentioned to everyone, we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to probably answer 2 or 3 more questions and start to close it out. I really appreciate everyone's participation, and I've tried to get through as many of the questions as I've seen them. So with that, there's a few more questions. The first one, I'm just going to finish with this one that's in the chat unless people have more. I'm curious about, and this comes from Daniel Huff. I'm curious about your thoughts on 3D printing, both for offsite and onsite construction, and whether companies in that space will accelerate sustainability. Anyone have any thoughts there? Sarah, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, also because I know and I appreciate Daniel a lot. So thanks for being here with us. Yes, I think as long as the material that is being used for 3D printing is a sustainable material, and in the early days of 3D printing it has definitely not been that case. So now companies shifting towards that. I think as long as we are using material that is, degradable and reusable, then it helps a lot because we can more efficient, as we've talked about before, so less waste of resources in general. And actually, from the way these buildings are designed, we just need less material because they're so precise. And so the short answer is yes, if they use the right materials.
Thank you. Thank you. With that, a question that I have, and this is our second to last question, for the tenant experiences, for Shana and for Arlen, and Shana, you can go first. Do you think that the sustainability features that are built into your product will influence the habits of the tenants who occupy that space? How is your product influencing their view and their relationship with sustainability?
Yeah, so I think there's a very long answer to this, and I won't do it because we are getting close to time. Yeah. But the specific answer that I'll give is, one of the things that we love about timber is the biophilic qualities of it. I think what's interesting is you're seeing the buildings go up in timber in North America right now. When push comes to shove, if you ask the developers who are building in timber if they're doing it for sustainability, the answer is usually no. They're doing it because it is a beautiful material that evokes warm feeling and also a feeling of sustainability. As we as a society move towards more desirability to be a part of nature, to touch and feel things that are more sustainable and moving toward that type of an aesthetic, timber does that. And so I think that there is something from a tenant experience just around the look and feel of timber that evokes and emotes the type of sustainable behaviors and feelings that we want.
Yeah. And Arlen?
Yeah, I would agree. Timber's a magical material. It struggles in some areas like sound and other places. So it's got to be augmented. What we did was we built our product, if you will, only a certain depth because we were interested in natural light being in every room. And we think natural light's a big piece of human health. We also built our product so that, the sliding glass wall, which is the wall of every apartment and a balcony on every apartment, there's a natural human connection to the outdoors. So it's about healthy. And so when we did our product, we actually engineered it or designed it from the inside out. So we started with the best living experience we could possibly come up with as architects, filled with natural light, 5-star hotel acoustics, things that would make it the best of the best in the market. And then we went to work for years to figure out how to build that in a manufactured way. So it wasn't, we didn't start with the problem trying to figure out how to disrupt construction. We started with building a better building that would help with Mother Nature, take care of us, and provide a living experience second to none. And then that's what we set out to manufacture. So we kind of came at it the opposite way of most of the people that are in the space, at least that we're aware of. We started with the end result of what we wanted as the outcome, and then we worked our way backwards.
Wow, amazing. So with that, I have my last question to all of you, and this is just a question that will benefit the audience. So what advice would you give to students and others listening today if they're looking to get involved in this very exciting, innovative, and critically important field of sustainability? And I'm going to first pass that question over to Sarah. I know you're a student right now and you're in it, but you have a lot of experience, and I'm sure that you could offer some of your advice. And then we can just go around the horn, Arlen, then finish it up with Shayna.
Sorry, could you just repeat the question? You broke up right when you asked the question.
Oh, I apologize. What advice can you give to students and others listening today if they're looking to get involved in the field of sustainability?
I mean, Stanford already has an incredible program for that with the IPA program, right? And so like now, obviously with the new school that they will start, and like that, there's just like a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise at Stanford, which you can just like, just try it out in a few classes. And if you like it, then there will definitely be a high paying job for you after.
Great. Arlen?
Yeah, I would tell everyone interested in the design professions or the built environment, this is the best time in history to get into this business. I think it was mentioned, things haven't changed for 100 years. I believe things are about to change significantly and pretty radically. So my 42 years, I'm going to get 10 of it in the new world, and everybody else is going to get their whole career. So I would encourage all of you that are interested. There's going to be a convergence of industrial design and product design into the built environment that's unheard of today. And that's going to create opportunities to do a lot of really cool, wonderful stuff. So I think you ought to come on over and sign up, because it's going to be a great place to have a career in the next 20, 30 years.
Awesome. Thank you. Shayna?
My thoughts are two things. Number one, take a non-traditional path, take the path less traveled, because we need unique and different perspectives coming into the industry. And you frankly only get that by taking different routes to get to where you want to go. But I think that also has to be coupled with my second point, which is be patient. I think I woke up at one point when I was 30 or something, and I was like, oh, I still have another 40 years of working. There's a lot I can do in that time. So, be patient, take those kind of non-traditional roles, non-traditional industries, do them for 2, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, because you'll still have a lot more to do, and you'll be really unique with a perspective coming into that.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. And I can resonate. I never knew I'd find myself from serving as a captain in the Army, working at JP Morgan Chase in New York City, and now running an engineering construction firm myself. So trust me, the path that you take will carry you if you're passionate about it. That's advice that I can give. And sustainability, it is our future. I strongly believe that this is the pressing problem that we need to align ourselves to and work towards. So with that being said, I want to thank everyone for attending the event today. And a special thank you to our 3 panelists who took the time to be with us. I really appreciate Arlen, Shayna, and Sarah. I thank you guys for your time sincerely. I would also like to thank Spire and JP Morgan Chase for hosting and coordinating this event. It was truly amazing. I would like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded and a replay will be sent out where you can rewatch the event. In case we were not able to answer a question that you may have or you would like to ask one, you can send a question using the contact information that will be sent out with the replay. Other than that, thank you all for attending again and have a great evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.